This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, creators of the annual Brewers Retreat. To brew on the Maine coast June 9th through 12th with legends like Vinny Salurzo of Russian River, get tickets now at brewersretreat.com. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest on the podcast today is Sean Buchan of Cerebral Brewing in Denver, Colorado. I got your name right, and I screwed up the brewery name. But welcome to the podcast, Sean.
Thanks for having me.
We are in their tap room down off of Colfax Avenue in the middle of Denver proper. Over the years, Cerebral has built a reputation for brewing kind of progressive styles and being kind of on the forefront of all of these trends that the brewing industry has embraced or otherwise, and I shouldn't say embraced, I should say both embraced and resisted in somewhat equal parts. But we'll get to this conversation in a minute. Before we get started, just wanted to give a shout out to our sponsors. As the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, reliability, and dedication to their customers' craft. For 25 years, G&D has led the way on innovative solutions that match their brewing customers' immediate and future needs. G&D backs every project they touch and provides service second to none. Contact G&D Chillers today for your chiller sizing needs at 1-800-555-0973 or reach out online at gdchillers.com. Also, this episode is brought to you by the Craft Brewers Conference and Brew Expo America, America's largest craft brewing industry gathering. Join your peers in Denver, April 8th through 11th. Details at craftbrewersconference.com. Speaking of the Craft Brewers Conference, that's next month, and I imagine, Sean...
We are aware.
Yeah.
Prepping for that right now.
Yeah, expecting an influx of brewer friends, for that important week for the industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's, we've been fielding texts from friends that are going to be out for a few months, so it's always fun to see how much they procrastinate like I do. So it makes me feel better, Yeah, 4 weeks away and they're building plans. Yes.
Yeah. How many collaborations are you going to do in that kind of time?
Well, that's what we're figuring out right now, actually. We've got we can't brew what we package on canning days just based on how much space they take up, so I think we've got the brew house tied up Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Monday. So I think I can't add any weekend brews or my brewers will kill me. So I think we're good.
Well, there you go. That's the beauty of the Craft Brewers Conference, bringing folks together. I'm sure we'll be here in your tap room and talking to folks during that week as well. Let's talk about Cerebral Brewing and what you guys do. I know we normally kick off these podcasts with a kind of a brief historical arc. But give me the 2-minute elevator pitch for Cerebral Brewing and what made you decide to launch a brewing business?
So I had a bunch of friends that were doing it. Honestly, I started, so my background is physical therapy. I got my doctorate at CU, started practicing, got pretty discouraged pretty early, started doing photography on the side, and started doing some stuff for a local booze blog, Denver Off the Wagon. Friends from that got me a homebrew kit, started homebrewing a lot. Then that classic homebrewer gets way too into the hobby and turns pro story starts.
Yep. I've never heard that one before.
I know, it's so unique. That's how we started. We opened November 2015, so we're about 3.5 years old right now, and yeah.
Yeah, you're one of those breweries that I can actually remember getting a press release about your opening and an invitation down there to the opening, and I mean, we've always felt like new folks in the media world, and yet now this March is our 5th anniversary for Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, and
congratulations.
Thank you, and but it's been fun to watch and develop a perspective, watching breweries like you guys start and then become something. And become connected into that broader world of brewers around the country in 3.5 years, which sounds like a relatively short amount of time to build a reputation on a kind of national scale for a small local brewing business. Yeah,
I don't really know what to tie that to either. I think a lot of it is just right place, right time with some connections. We had some really good friends in the industry, and you make friends with one brewery, and then all of a sudden you're connecting with other ones and learning about how to make, a better beer than you were before. So it's been a really fun, transformative 3.5 years. Homebrewing was kind of the same for me. I only homebrewed for like 2.5 years before we were like, let's open a brewery. So I guess things have advanced pretty far in the past 5 years, but it's been a fun ride.
Tell me about that kind of cultural connection, and I'm curious about this. I've remarked to other folks before, what's interesting is that, in other kinds of industries, competitors don't lift each other up and build a network for each other, generally speaking.
Yeah.
In the beer world, it's completely different. The success of individual smaller breweries and that feeling of connection is basically almost built on a mutual marketing, kind of plan, where by doing collaborations, by creating interesting things and new things together with each other, the entire, mass, and there's, a few hundred small breweries that are kind of all moving together, interconnected with each other, collaborating, building, social media stories, building exciting products that get their consumers energized, but at the same time, through that kind of connection, turning on their consumers to this other brand, that they're partnering with. And so it's this kind of, rising tide raises all boats, kind of collective, but almost, this almost a DIY ethos to the whole thing that's made it happen. It hasn't relied on manipulating national media or anything else. I mean, it's just kind of, it's a groundswell from the bottom up. But how does that work, and how did you get an entree into that?
I don't really know how it works. We're still figuring that out, but I would say on a local level, when we knew that we were going to get serious about opening a brewery, right, I asked anyone and everyone to let me shadow, let me come in and help. I had a lot of connections through our homebrew club that we started with, and a lot of those people had gone pro. So I got to, watch our mutual friend open up and like their arc to where they are now, and they've been completely transparent with everything, and some of my closest friends in the industry. And then other friends that had opened breweries too, I get to come in and like, hey, I'm just gonna brew with you today and make sure I understand what I'm even getting into. And local friends were incredibly supportive. Going and shadowing Bess at when she was working at Wynkoop at the time, and just hanging out for entire brew days and being like, I want to make sure that this is not only what I want to do, but I understand how to do it, because I came from homebrewing. I don't know what I'm doing back there. And I learned that, very quickly when we had our own system.
Yeah.
And then on a national level, I think it was, I'm not the most outgoing person, but I think I've just made an effort to kind of suppress that a little bit and push myself into situations that, I want to meet new people, and I want to learn from the best in the industry. And some of the connections just kind of happen spontaneously. I met the guys at Civil Society, where I was actually supposed to meet them, the CBC that was in DC a few years ago.
Yep.
And it never panned out. We were always, at different spots in town, and it just,
right.
And they were like, well, we've been talking for so long via text, like, come down, let's make a beer. And that was probably one of the connections that, then through them I've met the guys at Finback, and like, it just everybody knows somebody else, and you meet that other group of people. And then all of a sudden, it's this crazy thing where you have this group of friends across the country that you just see, once or twice a month at festivals, and those are closer than a lot of my friends anywhere. So
on that, there's the aesthetic of it. You produce good-looking materials out there, but is there some gateway of quality that the peers in the brewing industry expect from you, or some kind of game recognizing game, in order to, to kind of get through that, because there's a lot of people making, 7,000 breweries in the country right now, and yet, of that group that are collabing together and producing these beers, and part of that, you may be talking about maybe 300 of those 7,000. What is that like for you as a brewery? What are your criteria for breweries that you end up doing collaborations with?
For collaborations, we don't brew with anybody that we don't know.
Yeah.
So I do get a lot of emails around GABF and now CBC. They're like,
right.
Hey, let's make a beer. I'm like, hey, I'd love to hang out with you first. It's kind of like a date where it's like you're there for 8 hours. together, and you want to hang out, and you want to have fun, and so that's kind of our rule. Really, is like we collab with friends now, and at the beginning, I can't say that was the case because we were forming those friendships, but we had common interests. It was like, hey, we both brew this style of beer, and we, even New England IPA, whatever style you want to call that, there's a million takes within that, and it's kind of just looking at what the brewer's goals are. What do they brew when they're not brewing hazy IPA? And just finding those common interests and common goals. And then, what do we have in common? We hung out for 4 hours at a bar, and it seemed like 30 minutes. Like, that's going to be a relationship that we probably want to foster and have them here and, travel to their spot. I think we're fortunate enough that now that it gets to be about friendship and more of what it means on a personal level. It's great to have breweries come in and we get to put their label on a can or their logo on a can. But that's not really the end goal anymore. I'm not looking to collab to sell more beer. Sometimes we have to tone down the amount that we do because I look up at our tap board and I see that 4 of our 12 beers are collab beers, and I'm like, well, it's not the best representation of what we do. But unfortunately, we do have weeks with GABF and CBC where that is the easiest excuse for all of our friends to come see us. So it all happens at the same time. But it's still fun. It's fortunate to be in a position like that.
Yeah, so there's no, there's no quality gatekeep there, or
there is too. I guess that's like the unspoken. The quality of what they're producing has to be, something that we respect, and vice versa. Obviously, they wouldn't want to work with us if they didn't believe that we were producing something that was good. Branding is a big part of it too.
Yeah.
But most people that are, at the top of the quality game are doing some pretty cool branding stuff too. So that's the fun part of it.
How do you balance that? You mentioned that you like to have more of your beers and building your brand versus building this kind of connected brand and collaborative kind of thing with other people. It has to be a kind of constant challenge for you because you want to sell beer to your consumers and produce beer and serve it to the folks that walk into your tap room that represents what you do, so they build a connection with your brand.
Especially when a lot of the things that you do on a collaboration are maybe things outside of your comfort zone or don't fully represent either brand individually.
Right.
That's been the biggest challenge for us.
Right. Those collaborations are not the beers that you've brewed 100 times or based on beers that you've brewed 100 times where you know how to do it, you've got it down, the yeast can perform, Oh yeah,
things can go very wrong on
those.
Sure.
And you're a small business, you need to sell the beer that you make. We do,
but I mean, we're... I think you hear this from a lot of people that are making good beers. We dump. Fortunately, we have not dumped a beer in a while, but I mean, I think we dumped 8 batches in our first year. It happens. If a beer doesn't work out, you dump it.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, it does get to be a bit of a balance, and I don't know that we're balancing it well. I'll kind of get jokes from our taproom staff about how how many collabs we have on at a time, and sometimes it just that's the way it lines up. You at least coming into this, I always thought we'd have a meticulously planned tap list, and we'd hit these things. We have 12 taps, and that can give you a broad representation of styles. And a lot of times you look at your tap board, and it's like, how did that happen? It was like a year and a half ago. We looked up, and we had 5 beers on tap, and it was like 4 of them were dark, and we're like, oh god. Because things just, things kick in an order that you weren't expecting, or outside sales picks up on a beer, and you have to recover, and your next batches aren't out for a set amount of time, so you can't really do anything about it. We have a pretty limited production capacity here. We keep expanding, but it's pretty minimal expansion because we're a 4,000 square foot space, and half of that is production. So we try to be mindful of it, and when we bring people in to do collabs, I sometimes have to dictate hey, here's the styles I would prefer that we do based on I have 6 IPAs on right now. I'd let's maybe do something outside that box, or just change the IPA up a little bit if we're going to do something hoppy and not just make it blend in with the others. Yeah.
Let's talk about brewing more in a second, but first, another note from our sponsors, Great Beers. are made from select ingredients. With BSG, you'll bring the world your brew house with an unparalleled and diverse selection of ingredients from across the globe to just down the road. Their dedicated customer service team and industry experience provides you with assistance you need at every step of the way. Let BSG be your supplier of choice for products essential to making great artisanal beverages so you can stay focused on your craft. For more information, visit them at bsgcraftbrewing.com or contact them at 1-800-374-2739. Also, Ska Fabricating is the craft industry's leading choice for packaging line automation, specializing in depalletizing, repalletizing, conveyance, rinsing, drying, fill detection, and day coating. Ska Fab has over 600 installations in breweries, wineries, and distilleries worldwide. With a reliable team of engineers dedicated to fast, reliable customer service, you can count on them to provide systems custom tailored for your specific needs. Contact Ska Fab today at 970-403-8562 or reach out online at skafabricating.com. You mentioned earlier you guys use BSG and
we do.
G&D and are members of the BA. And,
Yep.
It's a nice little confluence when the folks we're talking to are also customers of our sponsors. No, we do appreciate the sponsors underwriting this. This is obviously content that we produce free and put out there in the world, and the support of them helps us bring these great conversations to you guys. So thank you to all of our sponsors. Let's talk a little bit about styles and the way that you brew them.
Yeah.
From those early days of Cerebral, you kind of staked out claim in 2015 and onwards with styles that were relatively progressive at the time. It's hard for me to now think back at 2019 back to those dark days of 2015.
I would
Those days before people in Colorado here
Yeah.
made hazy IPAs, and back when everyone thought that it was just that
Yeah.
kind of freak thing. But you got in the game pretty early on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we knew we wanted to do when we opened, and I would qualify the progressive statement as progressive for Colorado.
Okay, it's all relative.
We're on a bit of an island here. It's, we're obviously very inland, but things exist on the, say East Coast for years and years and years, and people here are still making the same style IPA. And we always joke about it, but before we opened, the Colorado IPA, if you want to call it that, was they're very good, but they are very malty. There's a lot of Munich, a lot of Crystal, a lot of sea hops, and those are fine. But I don't know what value I would add if I opened and did that.
Right.
Plus, I came from home
If
brewing.
I need to drink Odell IPA, I'm just going to go drink Odell IPA.
It's going to be a better version than us doing it.
They make a fantastic IPA.
They
it's
do.
one of my favorite beers in the world. But
yeah,
right, how are you going to make it better than them?
Yeah, I wouldn't, and it's all about making it your own on this scale too.
Right.
I came from home brewing where I was reading all these home brewing blogs, the Mad Fermentationists, and guys like that are doing these. I've never maybe once or twice had like a Treehouse or a Trillium or a Tired Hands beer when I was homebrewing, but I just saw what these styles were going for, and I just found them to be more drinkable when I was brewing them. I'm sure if I tried my homebrew now that I was making them, it would not be very good, but
of course.
So that was the direction we knew we wanted to take, and it was a way that we knew we would stand out, but we also knew we were going to catch a ton of flack for it.
Yeah. And it was the flavor in that style that drew you to it.
Yeah, the flavor and the drinkability, because for me, I've never loved the intense bitterness and that that gypsum, like chewing on a Tylenol taste that you can get on some of the more aggressive West Coast styles. I still like West Coast IPA, but what I found myself drinking was just, you're always looking for something different, and no one was providing that, and it wasn't really like us thinking about like a business edge, like I'm going to make so much money doing this. It was like, we're just going to make this. It's good. And there was a lot of trials and tribulations with us learning to make that on a professional scale.
Tell me about those.
Well, I would say the yeast. Yeast is tricky, and everybody thinks it's really easy to make a hazy beer, but initially your goal is never to make a hazy beer, but for the things we were going for that balance between attenuation, hop character, level of bitterness in that, it was a little bit difficult to figure out, because I was trying initially to just take homebrew techniques and put them on our 10-barrel system. So we were doing 160, 170 degree hop stands. I learned very quickly, don't add any hops before you do that, or you clog your heat exchanger with hops. So all the things that you can do wrong, we probably did early on. I think the end product was very good at the beginning, but it is much better now. But we had a lot of people that came in that it would be a balance of I don't like IPAs, and we could convert them to be like, no, I think you'll like this, and they did. But also usually the middle-aged home brewer that would tell me that I accidentally poured them a hef, and I would say, I'm sorry, this is not a Hefeweizen, but I encourage you to try it. It's maybe not a BJCP style yet, but it's what we like to brew. This is our IPA. It's intentionally cloudy. That was a difficult argument to make in Colorado when every IPA was clear.
How many of those guys come back and order it, specifically these days?
I think a good amount.
Yeah.
I do think there is a lot of culture in Colorado where people kind of just expect to walk in and see an amber and a brown and a porter, and all these brew pubs that basically started this brewing scene in Colorado still exist and make awesome representations of that style. And I think there is a big crowd for that. Yeah. Typically, that's the same crowd that walks in with a growler and is upset when we cannot fill it. So a little bit of crossover there.
For sure. So tell me a little bit back on the subject of hazy IPAs.
Yeah.
One thing I've noticed in drinking your beers for the last 3.5 years is that you've gone through some serious phases. Mm-hmm. It's not quite Picasso and his blue phase, but I mean, you guys tend to move through yeast fashion in a maybe a little bit more of a rapid fashion than most. Tell me about that arc, where you started, what you were brewing with initially, how you've kind of transitioned things over the years, and where you find yourself now, and then where you're going to go after that.
Where we started, I would say maybe not the best move on my part, but we started with a strain that I had used home brewing that I had bought from a Canadian yeast lab that was I think isolated from a Hill Farmstead growler. So nothing, I couldn't talk to any of my friends about how to use this, and it was like I liked the way it worked on a home brewing scale, and we used that for I think the first year and a half, and it worked really well. It attenuated well, which is something that we've always wanted in our New England or hazy IPAs. I don't
when you say attenuated well, what's that goal?
Yeah, on our IPAs, we're typically trying to finish around 3 Platos, around 10-12.
Okay.
Doubles can occasionally finish a little bit higher.
Which doesn't sound terribly attenuated compared to some other beers,
yes.
But, for the style, certainly is.
It is. For the style, it is, and, the amount of dextrin malt, or dextrins like oats, and, adding a bunch of wheat, it does add unfermentables, so we bring that residual sugar up, and finding a strain that wouldn't leave us at 6 Plato on our IPA, right, or cause us to have to mash crazy low. So I think that strain worked really well, but it was a little bit more finicky than we wanted to deal with long term. It would produce some higher alcohols and double IPAs that I wasn't a fan of, and I was a little bit scared of switching off of it because I had grown to know it. But then we kind of switched, and then we were all over the board for a little bit. I think we were. It's typically been a switch between London 3 derivatives and Conan derivatives. We've tried, dry yeast with SO4. We've tried, I think we had one batch that was an SO4 USO5 blend. We've done batches where it's Conan and Sactois blended. We've kind of gone all over the place and tried different things, and now I feel like we're finally settling in a little bit. But still switching I don't know. Now it's only maybe every 6 months. So we used Conan for a while, and really liked where it was headed. We do all of our yeast prop in-house. Yeah. So Patrick, our production manager, is doing all of that, and he was propagating all of the Conan, and all of a sudden we just had one slant that we grew up that just became a big diacetyl producer for us. So, we had that before we realized that it was a problem. We had that in 3 separate tanks. So we watched it, diacetyl bloom in tank 1. We had to do a longer VDK rest, and we had to croissant it with fresh wort. And we're like, okay, well, good. We got that one. VDKs are good, passed diacetyl test, and then the second tank did it. We were like, oh no. we're gonna have to do this to all three. So it worked out, and just longer tank time necessary, which kind of screwed up production a little bit. So we switched back to London 3 after that. And what we found is there's a much larger variance between origins of certain strains than I had initially thought. So ordering from one yeast provider was London 3 versus another. Conan especially, I think, just because the origins of that are people isolating it off of heady cans, and you never know what generation that can was. So pretty big variance there, and we're really happy with where we're at with this London 3 now. We made the switch about 2 months ago, so we're still dialing in exactly how we like this strain and fermentation profile and pitching rates and all that. But that's the fun of it.
Who's this one from?
This one is from Omega.
Omega, cool.
Yeah.
Let's talk about hops a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting arc. With yeast. How has that same arc of using yeast interacting with fermentation profile, say dry hopping earlier, during active fermentation? How have your approaches to that developed over time?
Yeah, that's changed a bunch too. I would say we started basically just incorporating homebrew techniques where I would dry hop during active fermentation. So we weren't very specific about when we would do it initially. It would be typically day 4, and we would just kind of do it on day 4, no matter what the gravity was at. And we quickly realized, what the sweet spot for that was. And with the Conan and London 3, we treat them pretty similarly. We now tend to dry hop about 1 to 2 Plato, before terminal. We did have a phase where we would dry hop at about 2 degrees Plato before final gravity and cap the tank, and just rely on 2 PRVs to just keep it at 15 until it was done fermenting. I think flavor that we drove through that, whether it be that unicorn of biotransformation or just hop utilization, doing it during fermentation, and how it basically just churns itself and shreds those hop pellets for you. I think that worked out really well, but it drove off aromatics. So now we're just a 2-stage dry hop for most beers. We do that mid-fermentation, typically anywhere between 68 and 70 degrees, allow it to free rise during that time, and then once we pass VDK on that, we soft crash to somewhere between 62 and 65, depending on the beer. Do dry hop 2, and then pass VDK again, and then crash.
Is that a consistent process across all the hops varieties that you use, or do you see different hops acting in different ways when you dry hop with them?
Yeah, the hop creep phenomenon is definitely different with different hops.
Yeah. So when you say hop creep, I know what you mean, but
yeah, sorry. So we'll do lately what's been happening is a little bit different than normal. So I don't know what the cause for this is, but typically with hop creep we would see dry hop 1. Numbers would stay stable for maybe another day, and then after that it would start dropping, like half a Plato a day, and we've seen it go many as.
And so for those that aren't as familiar with this is enzymes within the hops reigniting or restarting fermentation process, which then again produces all of those fun VDKs that you have in that first fermentation process.
Yeah, so obviously different hops have different enzymatic content.
Yeah.
So and that's not a thing that you can look up on your YCH or your BSG report. So you kind of don't know what you're getting into, and this is a new thing, so I wouldn't expect anybody to have that.
Yeah.
But we would see that hop creep after first dry hop, and that's kind of how we would rely on that for extra attenuation. We would mash a little bit higher because we knew that after we did dry hop 2 or dry hop 1, we would see maybe a 2 Plato drop from there to land at that 3 target.
Yeah.
But we've had some that have gone on for 18 days where it's been 0.1 Plato a day, and it's like, oh, please God, stop today. And I think some of those that was before we were doing much better VDK and diacetyl testing. We maybe could have gotten away with crashing it, but we just let them finish out, and sometimes those yielded.
What were the hops?
Ariana for us was a bad one a few months ago.
We say bad. It's not bad. It was just a challenging one.
It was not fun to deal with on the production schedule. We had to move quite a few.
There's no bad hops. There's just different processes for using.
I like the hop. I think it's a fun new German variety that we are going to play with more. But we're gonna give it a few months off before I wanna submit myself to that again. And I don't, it could have been any number of other factors. We're a 10-barrel brewery. I can never say that one thing caused anything.
Sure.
But yeah, that's Citra has been another one for us that when Citra is involved, sometimes we see a little bit more creep. I don't know if that's our lot or if that's Citra as a whole. Trying to research it and study a little bit more, but there's a lot of brewers talking about it, but there isn't much research out there.
Yeah, no, you sat on a panel at Big Beers, not this year, but the year before, with Ross Kadings from New Belgium, where you guys did some studying on that.
Mm-hmm. A little bit on hop creep, and that was mostly about bitterness that you extract while dry hopping. But that was definitely a point of discussion. And it's funny with some strains, some people say they've never seen it. And some strains like ours, it does happen. But now we just kind of acknowledge it's a natural part of the process. We just allow it to clean itself up. We've tried some enzymes in there. We've tried alpha-acetolactate (LDC) to reduce the precursor for diacetyl. We might try that again, but I think that was designed by a German lab that is not taking any account for how heavily we're dry hopping. So I don't think the amount that I'm adding to the tank is doing anything.
Okay.
So we found that wasn't super helpful in IPA. So we kind of got away from that again, but. Now it's just, we realize we're going to leave. We've always had longer tank times on IPAs, I think, than some of our peers, and I would say we average 3 weeks, where we want some of that cold, and then we try to give it additional cold time in the bright after that. But it's been a learning curve, but I think we're at a good place now.
When it comes to yeast propagation, if you're obviously you're adding hops into your tanks before fermentation is done. How does that impact the way that you harvest yeast and reuse?
We are able to, with our current strain, we're able to crop and either crop and reprop, or typically we'll pull on day 5, pull yeast and dry hop on that day. So sometimes it's enough to pitch the next batch. Sometimes Patrick has a prop going and we're blending. Or a lot of times he's just growing fresh props for these beers because it's in the end it's a little bit easier and it's less of a headache, because if you have a production built around going cone to cone on a beer and you can't, then that's not fun.
What do you use to prop?
In terms of vessels, so we have a typically like 3-stage prop. So we've got a shaker table in there that Patrick will go from slant to pitchable on everything, and then we just replace those slants every 3 to 6 months depending on how frequently we're using that one. So we start typically around 100 to 150 ml.
Man, your yeast company's worst nightmare.
Well, it was always a goal of ours. We have this lab built out from when we opened, and unfortunately it didn't work out at the very beginning to do this, but now
I would expect, with the science theme of Cerebral Brewing and the way that you've branded around that should be
it's more than just branding. For a while though, it kind of felt that was part of the initial goal, and it felt a little bit fake, that we're like we should be doing this, but it proved to be very hard. But Patrick's got that locked down now, and growing from about typically like 150 ml to 1,000 ml, and then we prop in kegs. We also have a 3-barrel prop tank we got from Mark's Custom Fab, so we can roll it between the back of house and into the lab door to propagate in there, and then we're pitching out of there.
I ask everybody that makes progressive or current hazy style IPAs about some of their favorite hops, and I'm curious about what some of your favorite blends are.
We're full on the Sabro train right now.
I like Sabro everybody.
A lot.
Sabro is so hot right now.
But I also that said,
what does it do for you? I think the interesting thing about Sabro, and what I love about brewers using it, is that it's never a solo hop. People don't use it because it has its own flavor. They use it because it is the best supporting actor in a hops blend that you can find. So, tell me a little bit about that.
And I don't even know if it's a great supporting actor, if you really think about what that would mean, because it shines through every time.
Yeah.
I like it. We first learned about it from our friends at Cloudburst when they were using it as an experimental hop.
Yep.
And I could never get my hands on it, and then just kind of somehow was offered some by YCH and bought a bunch of it. In the 20% and lower range, you get...
It was the homebrew hop. I mean, it was... They initially, were branding this and pushing this out there to homebrewers.
Yeah, which is... Yeah, that's me. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Just bigger homebrewer. It's that, that I've never opened a bag of hops before and smelled anything that intense before that was that definable. You open a bag of Sabro and it is coconut out of the hop bag, which is... For me, that was nuts. I was like, okay, well, this probably won't translate to the beer. And then we used it, and we're like, oh, it did. It really did. So I think less than 20% on that one, you get, pineapple and coconut and just generic tropical fruit. But if you go over that, you get this fun, cedar woody note to it.
I've definitely got that cedar. And then even a mintiness even that can kind of come out in higher concentrations.
So obviously we do not single hop that one. I think people have. I don't know how that would go. But it is good in blends, and obviously it plays nice with hops like Citra. We just did a double IPA up at Weldworks with Nelson, Sabro, and Citra, so excited to see how that one comes out. I love blending that one because it's going to add depth, and it's a thing that we've never seen before in our hops. Coconut's never, we have a lot of people that are like, I don't know, I don't think they added coconut to this. We didn't. But other ones we love. I mean, the stereotypical Citra Mosaic Galaxy we use a lot of. Motueka is one of my favorites. Is another blender hop.
Yep.
Just really bright, and we always like to blend our hops where we're not just getting fruit for the sake of fruit, and doubling on Citron, Mosaic, and Eldorado, and all of that. We like to maybe combat the fruit that we get from Citra with something on the earthier dank side like Columbus. So we've always tried to blend those things, and then the Motueka adds a little bit of depth where it's maybe a little bit of lemongrass in your IPA. Maybe that's not what you want, but I always like blending with that one. A little bit of that lemon lime Sprite character coming through.
Sure. I think it's an interesting one. I've had to wrap my head around this because so many brewers are using pretty similar blends of hops, and they're using similar yeast. They all know what water their peers are using, and so all the ingredients are right there. You can make what might seem to be the same beer as another brewer with, again, the same amounts of hops, the same blend of hops, and the same kind of amounts, same kind of grist bill, everything else. And then I was driving around the other day listening to some classical music, and that thought occurred to me that whether you listen to von Karajan or Bernstein direct an orchestra, it's the same piece, it's the same exact notes, it's the same instruments, and yet you get a very different feeling based on the conductor behind that. How do you imprint, as you kind of, conduct these ingredients in your own kind of, symphonic thing to just drive this metaphor into the ground? How do you put a cerebral stamp and make that beer taste like you and not just taste like everybody else?
It's tough. We definitely have a philosophy behind what we do, and we try to, I think having a similar process for all of our IPAs is, obviously a big help. But it's about that intangible thing that you're, when you're formulating the recipe, that what your end goal is. And I think it's very easy to brew these IPAs and be like, okay, well, we need another IPA. This time we're just going to use Mosaic and what other hop, and just pick another hop, and they work sometimes. We try to be, that's kind of the origin behind the name. We try to be more intentional. We try to put a lot of thought into what we're doing and talk about it, and have that end goal in mind when we're brewing it. We have a final gravity in mind, and it doesn't always happen the way you want it to. But we're looking for that. Like for us, I would say our IPAs are typically on the drier side for the style. We have some newer ones with the London 3 that we switched to that are a little bit higher finishing that we're messing around with, but overall drier finish. a little bit more intense bitterness than some of our competitors. And, just driving the aromatics in a unique way. I don't know that there's anything that we're doing that it's like, there's no edge, there's no, like, I've got this and no one else has this. It's just, it's our expression of IPA. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about IPA now. You operate equally adeptly in the worlds of pastry stouts, and now even like tiki kettle sours, which seems to be your latest jag.
Yes.
And we were talking before we started the podcast a little bit about that. Since you've already been operating with those with similar flavors coming from fruit, it seems like that next evolution, for beer flavor. You guys are obviously not the only ones doing it. That tiki craze seems to have taken off across the country over the last 4 to 6 months.
Yeah, I don't know where that one came from. That was the tiki thing. We just end up, you go to these festivals across the country, and most big cities have a tiki bar, and we just kind of found ourselves there at the end of the night. And then it's like, these cocktails are delicious. Like, I just want to make beer that tastes like this. And so we just did. We're still, we're only 2 deep. We've got the 3rd in the tank right now, and the first 2 were all about just trying to get our sour IPA base the way we wanted it.
Right.
With some of the more easier to use fruits, but now we're really excited to layer in flavors with some of the spices, some of the blackstrap molasses to mimic that rum profile. We'll see where this takes us, but it's been the past 2 months of obsession.
So here's the question for you: why call it a sour IPA?
I don't know.
Well, at least you're honest about that.
Well, I don't know what else to call it, and I think there's been people out there that have defined that sour IPA. Hudson Valley being that brewery,
right.
And I don't know that I would call it that, but it works and it sells, and I think people now have an understanding of what it is.
Right.
We do have a lot of people that review it, and they're like, I don't get any IPA in this. I'm like, well, there's a lot of hops.
Right.
We do a lower whirlpool temp hop stand like our normal IPAs, just less in the whirlpool, and then an intense dry hop. So it's all there, but it's really fruited, so you might not get that as much. I always struggle with styles because I don't know what to call things. I don't really. Anytime we have to enter beers into any like BJCP style, I'm like, I have to pull Patrick over. I'm like, I don't know what style this should be. Like, I don't brew that way. So we'll just brew what we think is going to be good. Some are obviously easy to fit into categories, but some aren't.
I think there is a rationale there, and for better or worse, the letters IPA have become shorthand to beer drinkers for hoppy. Mm-hmm. Hoppy means a couple of different things. It can mean fruity and bright and in that kind of hazy IPA type of way. It can also mean bitter, in that kind of West Coast IPA kind of way. So IPA means hoppy, in that broad definition of hoppy, which is why we now see things like sour IPA, even from traditional barrel-aged sours, breweries, branding those specifically as sour IPA. Of course, hoppy kettle sours being also branded as sour IPA. And so there's this broad spectrum, but IPA becoming that shorthand, if you will, for has hops in it, or has a significant and palpable amount of hops in it.
Especially for how diverse that style is now. I mean, I would say the IPA marker essentially means nothing other than hoppy now, because it's in everything.
So how long is this tiki trend going to last? And are we going to be talking about these by the end of this year, or is this just another step on the evolution of flavor for you guys?
I don't know. I mean, we've only released 2, so we'll see where it goes. I think it's one of those things, though, that for me is fun right now, and that's something that every once in a while, we're 3.5 years in, and you can get really comfortable with certain things, and then all of a sudden, IPA isn't as challenging as it's still challenging, but you need something new to like drive you to, be excited.
Right.
And tiki drinks are that for me right now, so we'll see. I mean, it's been, I want to drink lager, I want to drink saison, but this is the fun, weird thing that I want to do right now, so.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Lager and saison. Saison in particular is something that you've been doing since you started the brewery.
Yeah.
Not just sack saisons, but also Brett saisons. It's you've brewed some particularly good ones, and ones that especially the true collaboration that. I So I'm not sure that's a saison. Now let me backpedal a little bit. Anyway, I've had some fantastic dry hopped saisons, from you, and some fantastic non-dry hopped bread saisons. Talk to me a little bit about how, as a brewer, you balance some of those things that you're passionate about that consumers may purchase on a slower or lower level, versus these kinds of hot beers. I think as you've told me before, they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
You can like both of these things. And so, that idea that certain curmudgeonly brewers throw out there that you're just brewing that to make money also seems a little simplistic in its, in its critique, in that it's possible to both like dry Brett saisons and also like tiki-inspired sour IPAs. But how do you balance that kind of challenge between what you want the vision for the Cerebral brand and your brewery to be, and what you want to be known for, versus what your consumers want from you, and what they want to buy most frequently?
I think when we opened, we were more concerned on what we would be known for, and then we quickly realized that we had no control over that, in terms of what we were producing. So when we opened, we were brewing a lot of lower ABV mix, clean and mixed from saisons, and that's always been my kind of passion project.
Yeah.
And we were brewing a lot of IPAs, and we were occasionally brewing stouts. And then within that, certain things just took off more than others, saison being not one that took off. But that didn't shock me in any way. But we've brewed them, fairly regularly since we opened. And the goal was always to get the program off to the ground where we would have a few different bottled options of mixed firm or sour, saisons in that whole spectrum, beer to guard, any of those things. And I think we're in a pretty happy place right now where we get to produce those, and they tend to last longer. They definitely sit longer, but those are bottle conditioned products. So fortunate for where my passions lie, the shelf stability of that is really good. We definitely brew a lot of IPA, and it's, I don't know what percentage of production it would be, but it's the bulk of it. And we brew a lot of, bigger stouts, pastry stouts being part of that. And we just try to layer it in. You just have to kind of check yourself and make sure that you're not doing something and giving too much into what people are asking of you, and that you're still giving them perspective on what you want. We keep our IPAs true to ourselves. We brew them to a style that we prefer. Sometimes that means that people are going to go elsewhere for their IPA, and that's fine, because that's the world we live in. We have other producers in the state that make amazing IPA in a similar vein to us. That's fine. If they want to go drink their IPA, they can do that. We're going to do it our own way. But then, we try to just make sure we're happy with what we're doing. I don't want to just be brewing IPA for the sake of brewing IPA, because you can make more money if you brew IPA, but sometimes we're just going to take a tank turn and do something that could be perceived as stupid with it, but and sometimes it doesn't work out. But
you also don't want to just be brewing Brett saison to maintain some cred amongst industry peers, because
I think there's a little bit of pressure to do that. I think you look at some of the guys that you really look up to, and you look at people that have made their business out of just being true to themselves and only brewing that, and I don't think. I don't think that would work for us.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it would, and maybe I've given up on that a little bit. But also, I like IPA, so I'm fine admitting that. But yeah, it's that balance.
Okay. It's okay. We're allowed to like and drink hazy IPAs.
I do like IPA.
Although we say that as we're drinking a foeder lager beer here.
True. I mean, we've been drinking more of that than anything lately. We've got beer stout in town, so we drink a ton of that too. And
sure.
I don't know. It's just that balance of like what makes you happy, what do you want to do, and you have to layer that in, or it's not going to be sustainable.
Right. So tell me about this foeder lager beer. I've noticed that this kind of wood-aged Pilsner or Keller beer has been taking off. I was just up in New York last week and got to go hang out with the guys from Threes back at their barrel cellar, and drink some of their Keller beer straight off of the wooden foeder. Why make a lager and put it into wood?
I would say
outside of the first thing, which is that that wooden tank doesn't cost any more than a stainless tank, so maybe it is cheaper. And so, I mean, from a pragmatic standpoint, it's you're not tying up expensive tanks.
Yeah, that definitely wasn't the consideration, but I would say our motives lied in when we opened. We opened late 2015, and I think I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure we were the only home brewers that had gone pro that year.
Yeah,
it was beer stout opening, and it was Little Machine opening, and Spangalang, and Call to Arms, and all these guys with production brewing experience, and me being scared out of my mind that I maybe had waited too long to open. And then we drink slow pour, and you drink beer stout hellas, and you're like, oh, okay, so what am I going to do to this?
Right.
And that was pretty intimidating, and I think it just took some time to realize, like, I'm not a traditional brewer by any means, so I'm not going to brew a traditional German Pilsner. And I didn't know what that would mean for us, but then in Copenhagen, we were at the Mikkeller Festival and tried, I think it's called Prayer Group from Tired Hands. And it was one of the most life-changing beers I've ever had, where he was doing slow pours of that, and it was a foeder-fermented Pilsner. I think there was some wheat in there, and he said he conditioned it on a little bit of lemon juice, and it was just like the most beautiful table beer. I could have had a pitcher of that and been very happy. And something I'd never really considered. And then I've had beer from Threes, and they were another big inspiration here. And it was just another way I'd never really considered to basically make our stamp on lager, so that we could brew the style and not just be directly compared to someone that's going to be way more traditional than us. We were on, I think, our fifth. We just put a Hellas into the tank 2 days ago. So excited to see how that turns out. And it's a learning curve with this, but I think it's...
What have you learned?
Well, Patrick has learned that growing lager yeast is a little bit harder than growing ale yeast.
Sure.
Obviously, you have to pitch more of it too, so that's been something. But I mean, the one that we have now, International Waters, that'll come out in a few weeks, is our first in-house propagated foeder fermented lager. So that's kind of a big moment for us, and it's crazy what the foeder does to the beer, but it's not what you'd expect. I don't get any. We bought it steam neutralized, so I wasn't looking for any oak profile.
Yeah.
We did a bunch of hot rinses on it because you kind of have that sawdusty taste initially because it is fresh wood. But it's it's a beautiful foeder crafter's foeder. We got a 30 barrel, and it's this like intangible roundness in the flavor. The first beer we put through it was a stripped down Vienna lager, and the mouthfeel on it was fuller than it should have been. The body was better, and it just took a lot of those edges and just rounded them off for us. So we do all of our primary fermentation for our lagers in the foeder. We have a glycol chill plate. It's the biggest one that they could offer us. So we have glycol in there. And we do primary, and then pass VDK, and then we step crash 2 degrees a day and transfer to a bright for more conditioning because we can't get any lower than 38 degrees in there. So
how do your consumers like it?
It sells well. I mean, we knew this was going to be something that you talk about that balance. This is not something that I was like, I'm going to buy a foeder. We're going to sell so much damn lager. It's a thing. We sell, I don't know, it's probably our number 3 mover at all times in the tap room, which is pretty good when you have a lot of IPAs.
Sure.
It sells at accounts pretty well. Because obviously,
how many of your customers are buying a Pilsner to ride along with that pastry stout just to lighten things up in between sips?
Specifically, but I hope that's happening.
So what's on the horizon for Cerebral, Sean? What's next? What's most exciting to you in the world of brewing these days, and what are you looking forward to exploring more?
For me, I would say the foeder lager program we're growing and our barrel aging program. We lease space across town, so we've got about 2,500 square feet for our oak that most people don't know exists, which is fun. So we're up to around 190 oak barrels over there right now. Most of that is porter, stout, I would say, probably 60% of that. And then the rest is wild, mixed firm, Brett projects that we have.
Across town, that sounds like it's its own logistical challenge.
It is. So we have a box truck, and we...
How far away is it?
3.5 miles. So we lease space from Law's Whiskey.
Oh, okay.
So we have a branch house permit over there to store beer, and it's not fun, but when you're...
I thought Threes was crazy for driving on a forklift down a Brooklyn street around a corner to their warehouse, but 3 miles, that's a little different challenge.
Yeah, we fill barrels here, and then we load them. We don't have a forklift because we don't have space for a forklift, so we have an electric stacker. We lift them, strap them together, lift them into the truck, take 6 barrels over at a time. When we moved, we used to have, believe it or not, 75 oak barrels in this building.
Yeah. I think I remember seeing them.
Yeah.
It was pretty crowded.
Yeah, there was no room to work. I would say job satisfaction on the back was, suffering a little bit because there was too much stuff. So we eventually got that space, moved them all out, and that was an undertaking, getting them all over there. And now we're now we're starting to bring them back.
Yeah.
So that's fun. So finally having the room to grow that program instead of just releasing 2 a year.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
You still seem to drive lines for those. But, well, cool. Hey, Sean, thanks for joining me here at the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast here on a Friday. The tap room opened while we were talking and had some little noise, some energy going on in the back. But I think people will ultimately appreciate that we were here drinking some of your beer and having a great conversation. Thank you again. And, we're looking forward to hosting a panel next week here in Denver, Colorado at our Brewery Accelerator, where you, Neil Fisher from Weldworks, and Lee Cleghorn from Outer Range are going to talk about brewing trendy styles. Many thanks to our sponsors that help bring you this episode. G&D Chillers sets the standard for glycol chilling. BSG Ingredients brings the world to your brew house. SCA Fabrication is the leading choice for packaging automation. And join your peers April 8th through 11th in Denver for the Craft Brewers Conference and Brew Expo America. And if you come out here to Denver for that Craft Brewers Conference, April 8th through 11th, stop by the tap room here at Cerebral Brewing.
Come say hey.
Come say hey to Sean. Grab some of their beer. Whether it's a pastry stout, an IPA, or a Brett saison, they got you covered. Cool. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.
Cheers. This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.